He was an American general who led the Confederate forces during America's deadliest and most brutal war. He was a top graduate of the United States Military Academy and an exceptional officer in the US Army for 32 years. Here are a few facts you didn't know about Robert Edward Lee. He was born on January the 19th, 1807 in Virginia to Major General Henry Lee III, who was the governor of Virginia at the time, and to Anne Hill Carter. His extended family members included the President and signers of the Declaration of Independence. His father, Colonel Henry Lee, also known as Light Horse Harry, had served as a cavalry leader during the Revolutionary War and gone on to become one of the war's heroes, winning praise from General George Washington. Not much is known about his childhood, as he rarely spoke of it in his adulthood. His relationship with his father is also shrouded in mystery, as Henry left the family when Robert was 6, never to return. Despite their position in Virginia's ruling elite, the Lee family wasn't exactly wealthy. Without the money to attend a university, young Robert entered the United States Military Academy at West Point instead. There he quickly rose in the ranks and graduated second in the class of 1829. His financial position improved when he married Mary Ann Custis on June 13, 1831 at their parents' house, Arlington House. It was said that they were very devoted to each other, but that they were very different in character. They had several children, 3 sons and 4 daughters. All of his sons fought with him for the South in the Civil War and survived. All of his children outlived him except for his daughter Annie, who died of typhoid fever in 1862. When the United States went to war with Mexico in 1846, Lee finally got the opportunity he had been waiting for his whole life. In the service of General Winfield Scott, he distinguished himself as a brilliant tactician. As an engineer, Lee helped Scott find ways around Mexican strongpoints which weren't properly defended. For the very first time, Robert Edward Lee and Ulysses S. Grant met and worked together during the Mexican-American War. Lee was the captain of the engineers, while Grant was a quartermaster at the time. Both of them were among the forces that entered Mexico City and concluded the war on February 2, 1848. In 1859, 3 slaves escaped his plantation: Wesley Norris, his sister Mary, and a cousin of theirs. The 3 were headed north but were captured and forced to return to Arlington. There were some rumors saying that he had the Norrises whipped, and then when his overseer refused to whip the woman, Lee took the whip and flogged her personally. However, this is highly unlikely, as Lee was in some sense opposed to slavery. In a letter to his wife, he wrote that slavery is a moral and political evil in any country. He also helped his wife set up a school for slaves on his own plantation and freed all of his slaves in 1862. In 1860, when Abraham Lincoln was elected president, 7 southern states formed the Confederacy and seceded from the United States. The elected Republicans supported banning slavery, and the southern states viewed this as a violation of their constitutional rights. Lee made fun of the Confederacy in the early 1861, saying that the secession was a revolution and the betrayal of the founding fathers of the United States. At first, Lee accepted the position of the commanding general of the Union Army, but when his home state Virginia seceded, he immediately resigned from the US Army and took command of the Virginia State Forces. In a letter to presidential advisor Francis P. Blair, he said, "Mr. Blair, I look upon secession as anarchy. If I owned the 4 millions of slaves in the South, I would sacrifice them all to the Union, but how can I draw my sword upon Virginia, my native state?" While historians call his decision an answer he was born to make with his great ties with Virginia and family, research shows that this was a difficult decision that he made alone. His daughter Mary was the only one in his family who favored secession, and his wife especially favored the Union. Nonetheless, his family immediately followed him to the Confederacy. Upon the formation of the Confederate States Army, he was named one of its first 5 full generals. Later, he would assume command of the Army of Northern Virginia and would push back the Union Army at the 7 Days Battles and once again at the Second Battle of Bull Run. In only 90 days of assuming command, he ended the Union Peninsula campaign and defended John Pope at Second Manassas. Instead of a quick end to the war which the Peninsula Campaign promised, the war would go on for 3 more years and claim 500,000 lives. After a few more decisive victories against the Union, most notably at the Battle of Chancellorsville, Lee decided to invade Pennsylvania but the Union Army cut him off from the south and he had to fight his way out at Gettysburg. He encountered Union forces under George G. Meade at the 3-day Battle of Gettysburg. This battle would produce the largest number of casualties in the American Civil War. The first 2 days of fighting solidified the Union position, and on the 3rd day Lee launched a massive frontal assault on the center of the Union line. That assault is known as Picketts Charge, after George Pickett, one of 3 Confederate generals who led the assault. The charge, however, resulted in heavy Confederate losses and Lee was forced to retreat. This battle marked the turning point of the war, as the Confederate Army never fully recovered. In 1864, the new Union General-in-Chief Ulysses S. Grant besieged Lee's remaining forces in the siege of Petersburg. As the Confederate Army was devastated by attrition, the Union attack on Petersburg succeeded on the 2nd of April 1865, and Lee then made an attempt to join his forces with another Confederate army, but was caught and surrounded by Ulysses S. Grant. At the Battle of Appomattox Courthouse, he surrendered his forces and the war ended. After the war, he was pardoned by President Lincoln, but he did lose the right to vote as well as some property. He supported President Johnson's plan of Reconstruction, as well as supporting civil rights for all and a system of free public schools for blacks. He accepted an offer to serve as the president of Washington College, now Washington and Lee University, in Lexington, Virginia, and served from October 1865 until his death. While at the Washington College, Lee told a colleague of his that the biggest mistake of his life was taking a military education. He died on October 12, 1870, after 2 weeks of illness. He was buried underneath Lee Chapel at Washington and Lee University, where his body and family remain. What do you think about our pick? Did we say something wrong? For more videos like this, subscribe to Photon Feast and or leave a comment below saying what you would like to see next. Until next time, goodbye.